Okay, so we've been talking for a while. We've been talking for almost half an hour before I remember to record our get together now on October the 3rd, 2022. So let's switch into the comparison between native faith, indigenous religion, indigenous practice, and civilized faith, civilized religion, essentially in the West. It's not quite the contrast between native and civilized is less clear in much of the East, but I don't think we can get into a mini course in comparative religion. I think I want to stick with the most obvious contrast with the monotheisms and the native faiths. So characterizing what I'd call the natural religion, and not only because it's a religion of nature, with awe and reverence for the magnificence and the mystery of it all. It's natural also because it is native to us. It's what comes out of the human being. And because of that, the native ideas and native concepts have this pesky way of continually emerging within the monotheisms. They keep popping up, because that's, I would say, the way we're really meant to be oriented to the universe, as opposed to what's been imposed upon us that we're going to get into. So the native peoples are at one with nature, living in harmonious balance. They identify strongly with their land. They see themselves as unified with the natural entities through spirit. And spirit takes form in living and non-living entities. Great Spirit is never personified. It's the original and the ongoing source of all manifestation. But there's nothing in the native language that hints that it's a being, even though at times they can articulate prayer to Great Spirit. And there are lesser spirits. The essence of all things are lesser spirits. Some of them are pretty big, like the spirit of the east wind, and some are medium-sized spirits, like the game that they hunt. And in the making of humankind, in almost all native traditions, there's a lesser spirit entity involved in the creation. And this, I suspect, is a remnant memory of the role of the Anunnaki, the role of Enki and Ninmach in the original laboratory crafting of the hybrid Homo sapiens. Now, one of the reasons that the natives had such a rich spiritual life is that they had time to contemplate. They had time to just be, and to, I don't think they would have called it meditating, but to be at one with nature without having a task, because they had plenty of time. The anthropologists recently have, crunched the numbers and found that at least, in the Northeast, I'm not sure it was the same on the plains, but in the woodlands, it would take on the average 20 hours per week per adult to provide shelter, food, clothing. Now, their orientation to spirit produces an orientation to social organization. There are some divisions by role. I mean, somebody might be better at making moccasins than anybody else in the tribe, but it's not hierarchical in any way. The chief is chosen, but provisionally. It's by consensus. And they're also a consequence of having so much time that was not given to necessities is that they had time to talk. They were in conversation about life, about the tribe, about what should be done, about what's happening, all the time. They were in fairly constant conversation, sometimes formal counsel, sometimes less formal, but they were always discussing. That I can't get into too much right now, but that was probably that model, that social model probably had significant impact on the colonies, on the white people who were coming in to the Indian land, because the level of conversation that went on before the revolution, leading up to the founding of the nation formally, that level of conversation was amongst the people was completely unknown in Western civilization up to that point in time. It's not likely that it's a coincidence, pure coincidence, that it was going on in the woods and it was going on in the towns. Anyway, another thing about the native ways is they had no laws, no rules. Then there was a great law of peace of the Iroquois Confederacy, but when it came to managing day-to-day life, there were no laws, no coercion, no punishment. I mean, the reason that somebody didn't commit murder when he felt like it, was because his family was going to have consequences. He would not be punished. And that was a very interesting aspect. In other words, they really lived totally in freedom. You do what you want to do, but you should be mindful of what you're doing. Also in that society, no accumulated wealth. There was no point. Wampum had symbolic significance more than the actual condensed value, like a coin. And social welfare was a given. The widows and orphans did not starve. In total contrast, the monotheisms, which have their root, in the religion of the Jews of biblical times, that was a development over the course of some hundreds of years, out of a previous fixation on the self-deified, long-lived extraterrestrial lords of Mesopotamia, and that took place as those lords were losing power to the human kings that were serving them, and they were gradually losing power. The kings were gaining power. Humanity was beginning to become disillusioned with these gods, but not, not in rebellion against them. It was getting shaky. And then they began returning home after the nuclear debacle in the Sinai and the devastation of central and southern Mesopotamia. And then they finally left totally. So you've got, let's say, Abraham's conversations with God. And you could take them as they're presented as like, oh, here's the creator of the world, conforming to the needs of a human mind and ears, and communicating with this appointed human. Or you could say, well, really, this is a version that's updating and configured to fit a new theology that's developing, but it's really just a conversation of a kind that went between an Anunnaki lord and a vassal, the kind of communication that went on and was recorded in the tablets over and over again for thousands of years. Okay? And not just Abraham, figures like Moses. When in Exodus, in one of the chapters, it opens up with God speaking to Moses, saying, "I am the Lord," and that "I am," fill in the blank, was the formulaic beginning of countless proclamations in the Mesopotamian texts by one of the great deities, or even a lesser authority, maybe a king. That's one tiny example of how the Hebrew Bible is filled with reproductions of Mesopotamian texts, words, phrases, even whole passages sometimes, like pasted in from then ancient texts. So there are many passages that demonstrate that it was a faith that was being developed out of one that was fixed on the deities of Mesopotamia.
Mike, quick question, just curious, is there a view, whether it's yours or whether it's from tablets or whatever, in what the state conversation took place, whether it was Abraham and God or whether it was Anunnaki Lord and vassals? Was it typically in a awake, coherent state, or was it more in a dream state? Is there any continuity to beliefs about that?
I think that the consensus is that what's being presented happened in full consciousness, unaltered sensorium. It's an accurate account of an actual conversation.
Thank you.
Not a dream. There are a few episodes that are spelled out as dreams. Jacob had a dream, but other than that, no, they're meant to be taken as actual conversations, actual communications, and that, of course, when you think about it, why give that why give that form to it? Why not say I was inspired by, or you know, there was a channeling, and God's message came to me. You know, there are those passages, of course, but the ones that are telling are the ones that are really in a tradition of a higher up in a hierarchical system talking to a lesser being. And the continuity of the first monotheism as it was developing, the continuity with the pre-existing focus of life on the several great gods, that's there, you know, in the way in which the new faith went to such lengths to deny the existence of those gods. I mean, it's all over the Bible, at least well, not just the 5 books of Moses. It's sprinkled throughout. You know, the terrible punishment for any of the Hebrews who kind of fell and reverted, you know, and worshipped, you know, and the terrible, you know, fate of the quote idol worshippers, end quote, you know, that the Israelites were conquering, the, you know, and the obvious attachment that the people had to those olden gods. Otherwise, why go on and on and on and on throughout the Bible about you shall not have any other gods before me. The attachment was unbreakable, and that's why the new faith was really just an updated version of the worship of superior beings that humanity had been subject to since our very birth. We couldn't give it up. Look, even Solomon, the builder of the temple of the Lord, you know, in his later years, fell into worship of the olden gods. Even Solomon. Now it's claiming that religion, and then it's, you know, then both Christianity and Islam, you know, claiming to be the true religion of the true deity, not universalist in the slightest, but exclusivist faiths. And divisiveness characterized the Jewish tradition, not only divided from everyone else outside, you know, but also within the tradition. I mean, you can read this in the Bible. They're always fighting each other. I heard a joke recently. It's hard to grasp how really, you know, truthful and funny it is, but you know, it's perfectly illustrative. So a yacht drops anchor at some small, uninhabited, uncharted island in the South Pacific, and they turn out that they are going to be the rescuers of a marooned man who's been there for years on his own. Turns out he's a Jewish guy, and they're amazed to see that he's built 2 synagogues out of palm trees and leaves, you know. And they ask him, well, we understand that it was important for you to build a temple to your faith, but why 2? He says, well, I had to have a synagogue that I would never dream of attending. Now that's direct inheritance from Mesopotamia, where faith, devotion to the God of your city, was what drove warfare and hostility towards the followers of a different God ruling a different city. And that was the forever wars for thousands of years. And that's why, forever war and monotheism go hand in hand, completely at variance with their professed beliefs. I mean, Jesus is supposed to be the Prince of Peace. Somewhat to a lot of his followers. So in contrast with the native faith, natural religion, the spontaneous religion of all indigenous peoples, that they're obviously they have different names for spirits, they have different traditions, different ceremonies, but they're all really pretty much the same. But in monotheism, there's a being who rules. It's an entity to relate to speak to. And he, of course, he is jealous, demanding. There are rituals of service. The relationship is totally transactional. You do this and you get that. You do this and you get that, and from what we can tell, you did not want to cross one of the Anunnaki gods. You did not want to be on his bad side. And as a result, in civilization, people are proud to say we are God-fearing people. And that's such a perversion when you think about it. God is essentially heartless. And he can be, because of the link with the Mesopotamian gods, many of them, the highest ones, were identified with the gods of the heavens, with the planetary gods. And so they could be disruptive of the earth, as Nibiru could be. And all of the language in the Hebrew Bible of God smiting the earth and causing upheaval and earthquakes and everything, is a reflection that the Mesopotamian gods were identified with planetary gods, and the skies could be destructive. Now you're lucky, because not only did I fail to bring my charger tonight, I also failed to bring my Bible with me, because I was gonna bring in a lot of actual quotes. But it's okay. The notes are probably better. In all throughout Genesis, the deity makes the rules by which you're supposed to live. Really? Or was it the priests and the scribes, who were following tradition and could appropriate the authority that the olden gods had, and they took it on themselves, inducing along the way fear and shame in the name of the deity, and through ritual and observance, providing relief. That game of inducing fear and providing relief from that fear through obedience has been very good for the religious authorities ever since.
I regret that I will miss the next chapter as I unfortunately need to drop off early, but thank
Well,
you all very much.
great that you were here, Jane. Till next time.
Peace. Thank you very much.
Um,
So Mike,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep my camera off. I look awful. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I love this idea. I guess it's something that had been in the back of my mind for a long time, that there were essential differences, but I love the way you've outlined it. I think you could somebody could probably write a book about it, but it's almost too scholarly. You know what I'm saying? I wish I knew more about it.
Well, that's why I recommended Richter's novel.
Okay.
It's not scholarly, and it does a perfect illustration of Native faith, and the God-fearing white people, and how the Native faith was grounded in life in the woods, and how the white faith, the colonist faith, was grounded in subduing the earth. It's really very, very beautifully drawn.
Yeah, and the idea that the Eastern religions aren't quite so different also appeals to me, because I mean, I consider, I consider myself a Taoist, and for me the basic ideas of Taoism are, I mean, they're just like fundamental truth is how I see Taoism. And so you could say that they've had a more continuous communication with beings a long time ago than we in the West have. And so perhaps therefore it was more derived from natural religion as a result than Western religions were.
Big parts of Taoist practice and science is clearly had shamanic origin.
Yeah.
Qigong is a systematized shamanic practice. Acupuncture is, working with the way the field flows through the body.
Is it oversimplifying to say perhaps that if Western religions are based on concepts and ideas, and natural religions are based on a felt sense of something?
You faded out there. Natural religion based on?
Natural religions were based on a felt sense.
A felt sense, yes. Yeah. Now, it's, you know, it's not totally absent in the monotheisms. It's just subdued. I mean, again, it pops up. There's a line in I think from John, says, "Be still and know that I am God." You know, and just be quiet and you'll feel spirit.
Mm.
You know, and in the Jewish tradition, there's the divine spirit, the divine wind, ruach. Okay, but it gets small play, you know, compared with the, you know, the cheering section, you know, for the God whose name cannot be mentioned. You know, same thing, and you know, in the Trinity, you know, the big emphasis, you know, on the Father and the Son. You don't hear too much really about the divine spirit, the Holy Ghost. You know, we got to put it in there, but we don't really pay much attention to it. You know?
Whereas in Taoism, that which can be named is not the real Tao, right? So that's the overriding spirit again, right?
Yes. Now, again, we humans, we have our limitations and we have language, you know, so things, I wouldn't have to say have to get dumbed down. Things have to be intermediaries, you know. Now the interesting thing is there really are intermediaries. In other words, there are lesser configurations, there are lesser twistings of the spirit. So there really are angels and leprechauns, you know. You know, but we need them too. So they exist and we need them, you know. And so in you know, in pure Taoist practice, you are in you know, you are cultivating your sense of oneness in the flow. But there are also gods and goddesses, you know, in traditional Chinese religion, that people pray to and make sacrifice to. So, you know, that's actually a I would say a non-toxic remnant, you know, of the Mesopotamian faith. I'm pretty sure that Chinese, classical Chinese culture, you know, got its start as a colony out of Mesopotamia, as did the culture of the Indus Valley. You know, India was a not very long-lived colony of Mesopotamia. But as I said, because it's native to us, the native, natural, indigenous religion keeps popping up. So in England and Wales, you know, it popped up in the 16th century with Joseph Fox, the inspirer of what became the Society of Friends. The interesting thing about the society, the Quakers, is the earliest name seems to be the Society of the Friends of Truth. And they talked about the light, you know, and they did away with the priesthood. You know, you don't need a person to be an intermediary, you know, in your connection with the all, with the light, and the light outside and the light within. Now, but they were in a culture that was, you know, dealt very much with the personified deity, and so they could only go so far. In William Penn's extensive theological writings, he goes back and forth between talking about the light and spirit and how you can align your life and guide your life, spontaneously. You just know, a right action comes out of you. He alternates between talking about the light and then that Christ is the light. Christ was the light of, now I think he did that for at two levels. One was because that was the culture he was in. He really couldn't, there was no way to get that liberated, to give it all up. I think the other reason was that he wanted to keep his head on his shoulders. But that impulse keeps coming up, came up in universalism, and I guess in Unitarianism too. There's a more recent movement called unity. So it can't be totally suppressed. It keeps coming back. And then there are mixtures. There are crossings over and adaptations. So the awe of the heavens and the study of the stars and planets, leads to the solstice bonfires, which leads to Christmas tree lights and menorahs, around the solstice. But also, actually, sometimes the original pagan worship, so-called pagan worship, persists. So around now, I haven't heard any recent stories, so I don't know for sure that the tradition is continuing. But when I last checked, it was alive, and that is that the Acadians who were forced out of Canada and settled in Louisiana brought with them the tradition of bonfires, of solstice bonfires, and in the Bayou country, that there still are, big bonfires around Christmas time. Another way that the original and the superimposed mix is in Europe. There are a number of holy sites, holy to the natives, because they sensed the reality of spirit, earth spirit, welling up and coming out of the planet. They were like fountains of energy, and there are places like this around. A number of them are Linda has probably encountered, because Asheville is a center. Asheville, North Carolina, is a center for such upwellings, and those were sacred sites to the Druids, or whatever the priests were called, and the European cathedrals, many of them, were built on the sites that were already holy, because of the people's ability to feel the energy and to know that God God was there. In other words, the maker energy, that which manifests in form everywhere, was there in a pure, more concentrated way, and was deserving of reverence. And you know, and in our culture, you know, we're and I think this is true in Europe. I know it's true here, that native traditions, you know, get a certain following and honoring. So they are certainly a big part of, you know, my spiritual orientation, having done vision quests and sweat lodges, and paying attention to what the natives call the medicine wheel, which is understanding particular energies from the east and the south and the west and the north. Of course, outside of the religious system, the reality of the field, as it's explored through feeling, makes itself known. So we have systems that do that. Astrology, Western astrology, Taoist astrology, Hindu astrology, numerology, the Enneagram, tarot, human design. They're all you know, ways of tapping into and reading the field, the intelligence, the wisdom, and the love of the field. And then there are people, you know, who are, you know, devoted to these practices. So, you know, they can be laughed at, you know, or they can be revered, depending on your orientation. But those who are gifted with healing hands, and some in a system like certain kinds of craniosacral practice, or acupuncture, or reflexology, healing touch. There's practitioners of crystal medicine, plant spirit medicine, which is not herbalism, but really dealing with the energy of plant spirit. Channels, you know, people who go into an altered state and you know, channel a non-incarnate entity, and maybe saints, maybe the true saints, like the Dalai Lama, you know, you know, they have their consciousness, maybe even their physiologies, you know, taken over by the will, so to speak, of the infinite. Because when my impression is, when people talk to the Dalai Lama, it's like, wow, something has really happened here. And there have been others. There's been several coming out of India, who, whose presence was like, wow, this something is really, really happening here, you know. Now, Lindy said somebody could write a book. It's true. Although a lot of this, really is written down in Evolution Diverted, except that it's sprinkled, throughout the book, not concentrated somewhere. But the book can be read, if you extract those parts, as a commentary on the Bible, as a kind of a suburban Philadelphia Talmud. Somebody told me that, referred to my understanding of things as my Torah. I went, what? That's because the real meaning. I mean, Torah is not just a title for a bunch of books. It's an epithet, and it means the teaching. It just means teaching, in the way that rabbi isn't just a title. Rabbi also means teacher. So,
I guess, let me see if I can be more articulate in my thinking. Can you hear me okay?
hear you fine.
Good. I had a conversation about this with Rick. Remember Rick, the storyteller?
I know, yes, I know of him. I've read his book.
Rick, right. And so he brought up, I had dinner with them on Friday night, and their son, who's a fellow bioscientist and very bright and has a new lab at Emory. And I've been trying to get him interested in some of the genetic implications of this. And anyway, when I try to defend this, there's what I keep running up against is this idea that, well, there's just so many other explanations for that, whatever it is that I'm bringing up as the example, and it's beginning to look to me like the only way this is ever going to pierce the common consciousness is by overwhelming evidence. I mean, page after page after page of this fits this narrative until there really isn't another reasonable narrative, I guess, is what I'm coming around to now. And because it's hard to talk about with people. It's about, let's face it, it sounds like science fiction.
Yes, and if if it's true, if it's our true history, our outrageous true history, and it's heard, it will infiltrate, it will insinuate, it will trickle in somehow. That's why all my energy is directed towards the movie, which tells the Mesopotamian tale within the movie.
Right.
it's presented as the belief system of this community. This community which is living naturally and devoted to a role in healing the world with their knowledge and with their skills.
Mike,
I mean,
Mike-
another way about it is that, as somebody said very early when he saw a presentation, he said, "This has got to be taught in schools. Kids have to be exposed to this, before their concepts are pretty much frozen." I don't know, Lynn. I mean, I recall, saying in Evolution Diverted that, this for there to be something that feels like proof, it's going to take a great deal of exploration and research and study in a number of fields for quite a while.
Well, and the other piece of that is it useful? I mean, if is this history, is knowing our true history going to help us in the messes that we're in today? That's, I think, the number one question. Don't you?
The truth will set you free.
Right, but first it will piss you off. Yeah. So my main argument for why you want to pay attention to this, so I just want to check and be sure this is right, is that there are literally still millions of tablets from the Mesopotamian era around on the planet. And when they talk about their history, this is the story they tell. And there are multiple copies of this story or versions of this story that are extant. And this is what they say happened.
And of course, those accounts, they're very fragmentary. And you can only, Sitchin's genius was to pick up this piece here, this piece here, this piece there, and put it together into a continuous narrative. Because the isolated pieces, by themselves are like, oh, okay. They say that happened. They say that happened then, but it's hard. There is no unified Mesopotamian tale until I wrote one.
All right, excellent.
Okay. Why may sound simplistic, but why the reason I'm doing this is because it's clear to me this is what I'm meant to do. What my effort will achieve, I don't know. But I'm determined to do my best with it. And my best will be a feature film, not a book. No more books.
How's the film? Is the film making progress? Beyond the name change?
Yes, in that all of the mechanics that are needed to organize the development of the film, development, also known as fundraising. I mean, the first phase is development, and then pre-production, and then production and post-production. So development's about to begin, and that requires a number of things which are falling into place right now.
Oh, lovely.
That involves retaining an attorney. It involves crafting a brochure for potential investors. It involves getting what's called coverage, which is a review of the screenplay by an agency in the business. In other words, not a critic, but someone who can appraise its marketability. Okay, it involves getting somebody to come up with a realistic budget at present. In other words, this is what it's going to cost to make this film as written. All of those things are coming together. So I'm close to, forming my my tree of contacts, and getting going with it.
Very cool. Thank you.
So that
Excellent.
it's coming together. We're talking. We're talking weeks, not months,
Ooh,
to be able to launch it, launch the effort. And so far, all everything has come together. Everything's lined up. So it's
it sounds like you're in a flow.
yes, it seems like, yeah, and when you're in a flow, your effort is you need to understand that the flow is everything, and the best you can do is make sure you don't get out of the flow, and do your best to stay in it. It's like if you're crossing the Atlantic from Florida to Ireland with the help of the Gulf Stream, and that's where you're going to wind up. But it will help. You can certainly accelerate a bit. You can do some stroking. You can just make sure that your stroking doesn't take you outside the stream. That's all.
Yeah, very nice.
But at the end of the book, there's a talk about a dream, in which someone who's a friend who's a devotee of both orthodoxies. He's an observant Jew and a physicist. And he asks me what the book is about, what my work is about, And in this dream, I answer, God is real. And he would think, given the content of the book, that that my case was the gods were real, but no, the bigger truth is that the all is real. And the biggest obstacle to acknowledging what I'm convinced is what happened will be established belief of all kinds, like you said, and and the most pressing, most powerful of those will be the religious beliefs and religious authorities. And I have no idea how how established belief systems can be reoriented, not destroyed, not how they can be reshaped to take this in.
Well, you have an example with Galileo. How many centuries, and the Catholic Church finally said, okay, but that was the case.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think, Mike, that when there's a strong enough interest to science, as we understand science presently, the data will be forthcoming. People will develop the science that supports that origin that you describe. When there's enough interest, there won't be any choice. The scientists will have to do that.
What I don't know is how much, traumatic amnesia is going to be an obstacle to that process. How much the shame that comes of having to acknowledge that what you've been believing is wrong, that it's been.
Oh, well, you already know, they just die off.
Yes.
They don't change.
I mean, the arguments against the Big Bang Theory are powerful, but it's become so embedded that how long is it going to be before it reaches the trash can where it deserves to be? Who can tell how long that's going to be? Because it's really gotten, it is so counterintuitive. It is so fundamentally wrong.
Centuries, maybe. It's just, the only thing that really honks us off is people that rise to a pinnacle of power and authority in the sciences promoting the Big Bang Theory are very well rewarded.
Yeah.
Now, if they were treated crudely, you wouldn't mind it so much. Personally, you wouldn't mind it. You would mind it for the scientific accuracy and the validity, but personally, you wouldn't mind it so much. It just takes, I recall being shocked at reading a history a long time ago. I think I remember it mostly accurately. As the Civil War as the Confederacy was being defeated, there was some general who opined that there was no way that this war was ever going to end completely until you killed every last one of them, because they weren't going to change.
And they haven't.
Well, it took forever after World War II for the splitter German groups to give up. They kept trying to resurrect themselves. So my personal hunch is that I don't waste time trying to convert people. I make an argument, but I don't spend any time trying to persuade to come over and leave what you've been doing and come to this side, this approach. It's not doable. Unless it's family and you want to talk, or close friends and you want to talk and discuss, but to make a general public presentation thing, I think your approach with the movie thing is just excellent, wonderful. because that becomes an experience. It's not just a head trip.
Absolutely. You know,
Yeah, and then it's an experience that they can tie into other similar type experiences. I mean, not the same narrative necessarily, but similar type experiences.
my intention, if it, if it gets made as it's conceived, is that it will be transformative, and not necessarily because people will come out with an altered belief system,
Right.
just be transformative.
Yeah.
Period. To reflect on Linda's question, but how do I know that this information, is going to be healing? Well, and one way of thinking about this, who knows? Because it's never been done, it's never been tried, except in small scale. I know, when I, realized that one implication of the theory or of the tale, is that we carry unintegrated archaic forms of consciousness from the early times, that we carry a primitive Homo sapien, Homo erectus consciousness, that says, gee, I'm inferior. I'm not worth very much compared to these other guys, and we carry this the Anunnaki consciousness of a superior being who's marooned here, stuck in this lesser body, and we carry the consciousness of the earliest humans who's confused, like, who the hell am I? I look at my two parents and can't make any sense out of that. The Anunnaki consciousness is saying, I don't belong here, at all. The Homo erectus consciousness is saying, I just want to live in nature, leave me alone, and when I realized, yeah, I've heard all those voices. That's their ultimate source, not in my family story, not in this or that in my particular history in this incarnation, but wow, I've been carrying that as in the human field, in Jung's term, the collective unconscious. When I realized that was what was going on, those without my trying to do anything about it, my sense very, very clearly is that those unintegrated voices started to cooperate. They started to come together in a more unified consciousness. Can't put my finger on it with a great deal of clarity, but there was a spontaneous healing that happened. So that's the sort of thing which I think is possible.
Well, and that's actually the kind of question I was asking, Mike. Is what's your experience? What heals in you when you put yourself into a world where this is true? These are kind of as if questions, but also, from people I've been asking myself that same question, because I have been looking for those inner voices and trying to understand the parts of myself that aren't particularly well integrated into one another. And I'm also watching and really becoming very aware again of how important water is for me, and what an enormous effect being able to get in the swimming pool once a day has on my general mental well-being. And realizing that comes from somewhere. That's part of my heritage that I picked up. However you want to think about the mechanism. And so if I feel like seeing myself as this hybrid creature that doesn't quite fit. I'm finding very helpful in understanding myself and in understanding the mess that we're in. And this whole being driven towards authoritarianism, that's really the key, is that this is what drives us toward authoritarianism. And I think seeing that in yourself is powerful. What do you think?
Jim, I guess Jim's gone. Tens of thousands of years, we looked up to powerful beings. They gave meaning to life. We revered them. Everything in civilized life revolved around them. Whether they were always present or not didn't matter. If they weren't present, their chamber was up there on top of the ziggurat, awaiting their return for when they came back. Everything was organized around them, and the later when they were, the kings were agents of and replicas of the great ones. So we loved them, and it was they captured what should have been our spontaneous and uninterruptible immersion in the all, whose essence is love. I mean, love is the subjective way of our being in connection with the one. When we love another being, whether it's a partner or a pet, our field is in harmonious unity with the field of that other being, and that interpenetration and that resonance of fields we experience subjectively as love. So they hijacked it, and for their own purposes, they say, we are the ones that you are to love conditionally, transactionally, and we became, in a sense, addicted to it because we lived under them in fear. We became addicted to their substitute, and that's why we keep returning over and over again to that model. So it's powerful.
Do you think there's any significance to the, I guess, inescapable observation that the person that's being followed the most currently is really stupid?
Is really
stupid. I mean, Trump is not a smart human being, and there's something about there's almost like a body language of I am superior. I've been trying. I really want to understand what people see in him, and it's not because it's more like a body language thing. There's some recognition that what he represents is something worth worshiping. And I sure don't see it.
In nature, the dominance of the alpha animal is conveyed through body presence, through the way he walks around. Okay, in nature, that dominance is won through trial, and the function of the posturing is to maintain the social order without it having to be challenged over and over and over and over again, you know, and it doesn't get challenged until he ages out and can no longer defend the title. Humans have that same instinct for deference to the posture, but the peculiar thing about us is that it doesn't have to be one. All you have to do is act as if you expect to be deferred to, and people will tend to defer to you.
Yeah, that's what I was observing with him. It isn't anything that he's earned. No.
It couldn't happen with him unless it was, you know, unless it was a widespread human trait.
Sure.
And I mentioned this, you know, somewhere towards the end, 3/4 of the way through Evolution Diverted, the psychological studies that have demonstrated how strong a trait this is. You know, so there are people who will defer to the leader, you know, the one who's posturing, you know, even though it's clear that it's not warranted. He's a jerk, and to me, this is one of the imprints through both nature and nurture, genes, and tradition, imprints on us from the Anunnaki. That's the way they wanted us to be.
But definitely deferring to them. So this is Milgram's.
They'd be the ones at top of the pyramid because they act,
Right.
but once it's in us, so it can be exploited by anybody who is smart enough a con man to see, hey, this is what you can get away with, Now
exactly.
And it has to be an imprint, because if you look at when this happens, in government, in business, in the military, when somebody, has got authority and power, just because he's acting like he ought to have it, or he inherited it and therefore ought to have it, the results are disastrous, inefficiency at best, and sometimes collapse, Putin's going to bring his world down upon him,
Oh, he's certainly talking like that.
He's going to end in flames. So it is so unadaptive a trait to have unearned deference that it could not possibly have been naturally evolved.
So it just seems to me like it's such a key factor in our survival. I've just recently finished that Milgram's book on his experiments, Stanley Milgram.
Okay.
Called Obedience to Authority. It's his experiments with the scientist and the electric shock.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
And there's no suggestion, I don't think, that anybody caught on to that. I think with the Stanford experiments, there was some question about whether it was really authentic at the end. But with Milgram's experiments, I don't think there was any question. And something like 70% of the people would deliver a lethal shock to somebody just because an authority figure, somebody in a science, dressed like a scientist with a clipboard, told them to.
Gee, I've heard of things like that happening in academic departments.
Well, no. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a terrible defect in us, but it's not unfixable. I hope.
Well, it's a huge vulnerability. That one, that's a good point. I think we're stuck.
Wow.
I think we're stuck with it. I think, it's one that we're gonna have to be, aware of as a vulnerability at an individual and a cultural level. Yeah, I think we're stuck with that one.
Well, you can't fix it till you see it.
And if you can see it, you can control it. I mean, there are some things that I think that are manageable, but not curable. This may be one. This may be one. That's a good,
Yeah.
really interesting consideration.
Yeah, it is. It really comes to me today that this is every time we talk, I get another round of, oh, that's why we are the way we are. I find this very helpful.
So one logical piece to me is about this view of our origins, and as related to a happier, healthier, longer future for our species, is that this knowledge is necessary but not sufficient. In other words, without it, I just don't see us reversing our direction. Our direction is, circling the drain.
No kidding.
There's no way that you can look at, the accelerating deterioration that's been going on, other than to say, unless there's a fundamental, paradigm shift worldwide, the civilization is not going to survive. But like,
Yeah, that's looking pretty clear. Sure is to me, anyway.
but things, life on Earth, as we know, has been practically extinguished more than once. Most species wiped out. A few left, and it starts all over again. The evolutionary diversity develops all over again. Happened to
Well, and we've survived the Dark Age too before.
yeah,
And
by a thread. Did you ever read how the Irish saved civilization?
no,
There's a guy whose name slips me now. I can text it to you when I something like, might be Clancy, but anyway, the surviving writings of all the classical writings, Greek and Roman, made it to the Irish Isles, and were copied over and over and over again by the monks. It completely disappeared from Europe, from mainland, from the continent. They were gone. It was the Dark Ages there. And that knowledge repopulated, Western civilization through these migrant monks who came from Ireland and brought the teachings with them. They saved Aristotle and Plato and, everybody else. It hung by a thread. Would have all been gone, would have all been gone without those monks, without the devotion of those monks.
Nice.
I mean, there may have been a few, fragments here and there, but that were preserved. But the entirety was due to these devoted monks. So
So what can we do, Mike?
we can do what we can do.
So I'm going to be a poll worker on November 8th.
Me too.
And I really am engaged in local politics because I care about my community. But I don't think that's going to be enough.
Well, there's the stream. There's the flow. And this planet seems to be in a good place in the solar system, in the galaxy. The long-term prospects are good. And of course, the long-term prospects for life in the galaxy and the universe are pretty good. So each planet is an experiment. And my thought has been that this species is an experiment. I mean, all species.
Oh, I think so. That I don't know whose experiment, but I think so too.
I mean, all species are an experiment to an extent, but this one is a particular one. The unifying, the mixing of humanoid lines at different levels of development. One of them in a state of grace, state of nature. The other one perhaps exhausted, static, hierarchical, and traumatized, what that combination does. To be determined.
Yeah, to be continued, hopefully. Although it's not looking real promising at the moment. I mean, if our civilization collapses now, it's not going to be the same as the collapse that led to the Dark Ages, I don't think. I think we lack the resources that people back then did.
My guess is that there won't be total destruction, that there'll be some surviving centers. There'll be places where a healthier growth can emerge.
Unless they're all radioactive. Oh, back to the nuclear war that happened back. How long ago was that, Mike?
I don't have the book with me. It's
on your timeline.
Yeah,
but is it what? Why are those areas not still radioactive?
Well, I don't know what remnants might be there. Nobody has really looked in the Sinai to find out. For that, nobody is, you know, although I'm not sure how long the ground effects of air bursts of medium-sized nuclear bombs, how long that would last.
Apparently, there are new ways that have been uncovered to unleash massive destruction and not make it all radioactive. Kill lots of people. The thing with the airburst, I think, is new since World War II. So,
Yeah.
like,
Well, okay.
on that note,
On that note, we've my personal battery is running low. My machine is still cooking, so that's good.
yeah.
And it's always, you know, like after one of our talks, I said, gee, I think we've exhausted everything. I don't know what in the world we could possibly, you know, find to talk about in a month. But something always seems to happen.
Yes, it does. It always comes up, doesn't it?
So I am expecting that the beginning of November will reconvene. Okay.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mike.
Peace.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.